So let's begin our program today in Seoul, where South Korea announced a summit with Pyongyang at the Demilitarized Zone next month. The announcement comes following the arrival home of a South Korean delegation after meeting with the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and other officials in the DPRK capital. Let's take a look at what exactly happened and what's considered to be a breakthrough in inter-Korea diplomacy.
After returning to Seoul, the leader of South Korea's delegation to Pyongyang announced plans for a summit between DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and the South President Moon Jae-in to be held at the Demilitarized Zone. It would only be the third ever meeting held between leaders of the two Koreas.
남과 북은 4월 말
The South and North Korea will hold the third summit at Peace House in Panmunjom in late April. For this, we agreed to hold working-level talks.
A hotline is also to be established between the two leaders so they can speak ahead of the summit about de-escalating tensions on the peninsula. Having expected to meet senior officials in Pyongyang, South Korea's special delegation instead found themselves wined and dined for more than 4 hours by none other than DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and his wife. And it appeared President Donald Trump's preconditions for talks between Pyongyang and Washington had been met.
북측은
North Korea made clear point of view for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and said there was no need to keep its nuclear program as long as there was no military threat against it and the safety of its regime was secured.
Though the breakthrough diplomacy does not mean there won't be trouble ahead. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has reiterated his call for even deeper inter-Korean dialogue, while at the same time calling for stronger military cooperation with the United States, saying there can be no lasting peace without strong military power. Large-scale war games between South Korea and the United States have been postponed until after the Winter Paralympics, though they are then scheduled to resume. That could provoke a response from Kim Jong-un, who, according to the South's delegation, has promised not to test nuclear or conventional weapons as long as talks are continuing.
So, talks between Seoul and Pyongyang, really? That is a ray of hope or merely a smoke screen? I'm sure that question has been considered a lot by the three guests we're going to talk to. First of all, in Beijing, Zhao Tong, a fellow in the Carnegie Nuclear Policy Program, based at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir. Also joining us in Kuala Lumpur is Yun-Jung Lim, Assistant Professor of the College of International Relations here with a university in the country. However, she's originally coming from South Korea. And also in Washington, D.C., we invited Douglas Paul, Vice President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Even though the two of you are colleagues, I'm sure you have very different opinions. So let me begin with the opinions coming from South Korea. Ms. Lim, how much shall we trust the indirect quote coming from the South Korean delegation which went to the North Korean capital and said the North is willing to talk to the United States and denuclearize as long as there is security guarantee? How much should we trust this indirect quote?
Okay, thank you for the asking very direct, explicit, simple question to me first. Again, of course, we always have to be fully cautious because North Korean regime, as we all know, it has been unpredictable. It has been less trustable compared to very normal countries. So I hope we can fully cautious about the real, again, the meaning of all this wording. But at least I feel very much optimistic about his that kind of vocabulary, the wording this time.
Okay.
Because he clearly showed that he is again willing to come to the table to start the dialogues with the counterparts, with the key counterparts in Washington, D.C. So again, of course, we have to be cautious, but at the same time, I'm optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic, probably that's the way to sum it up. The development between Seoul and Pyongyang was welcomed in the U.S. to a certain extent. Donald Trump tweeted this. Take a look at this. Possible progress being made with North Korea. First time in many years, serious effort made by all parties concerned. That's coming from the U.S. president, of course, through a tweet. But Mr. Paul usually have very different opinions compared to his president. So let's go to Mr. Paul. What exactly is your judgment, sir? Is the U.S. willing to talk?
Well, I think the U.S. will have exploratory discussions that might lead to negotiations and might not. There are new elements in what's happening since the Olympics, and there are very familiar, disappointing kinds of elements that are also in the mix. The fact that the negotiators that went to North Korea are very experienced and reliable personalities makes me believe that we really have to give them credit. But we shouldn't overstate what Mr. Trump has said. He's always looking for easy victories, and claiming that our pressure tactics have worked is really getting the cart in front of the horse. It's been the new sanctions are only a few months old, and to claim victory for those at this stage is too early.
All right.
And to be fair, Mr. Trump said he needs to test it too. He doesn't know what the real result will be.
All right. It seems that there are already 2 persons of skepticism expressed their opinions on our show so far. Let's go to the other side of the discussion, which of course is about the attitude coming from the Chinese side. Chinese Foreign Ministry said that today China hoped interaction between Pyongyang and Seoul could lead to talks between the DPRK and the U.S. Foreign Ministry spokesperson praised the dialogue between the DPRK and South Korea during the Pyeongchang Games, calling it a hard-won momentum for easing tensions on the peninsula.
We have always upheld the view that the interaction between the two sides of the DPRK and the ROK should be expanded to other parties, including the interaction between the DPRK and the United States. At present, the efforts to improve DPRK-ROK relations should be expanded to the common endeavor for realizing denuclearization and lasting peace on the peninsula. China is at all times ready to make its due efforts and display a positive road to this end.
How should we interpret this? A lot of wonderful, constructive words being used. Mr. Zhao, how do you feel about China's attitude and feeling so far?
I think China is very pleased to see the most relevant players starting to talk with each other directly. And China has long believed that's the fundamental way to resolve their differences. And I think China is willing to help on the side. China is happy to promote diplomacy behind closed doors. On the other side, there is concern that China might relax some of the sanctions given the positive attitude of North Korea recently. But I think that concern is unfounded. As long as existing UN Security Council resolutions exist, I don't think China would significantly relax its sanction measures against North Korea.
That's exactly, or at least somewhat, the South Korean president also said, according to the latest report, Ms. Lim, he said that South Korea still continues to continue with the sanction mode, not necessarily until, to change it until the real denuclearization happens. But, you know, there are a lot of things that is not clear. There are a lot of spaces between words that can be maneuvered, at least for some negotiation possibilities. So the question is, Ms. Lim, how much will the South Korea be and still holding its current position, not change a bit? How much is it moving, let's just say, toward the earlier practice possibly, even though South Korea denied it, saying there's no under-the-table discussion between the North and South, there's no money provided to the North as a result of the latest discussion. Ms. Lim.
Yes, I hear, you know, there's voices from other panelists and from you too. Of course, we also pretty much cautious. And we also experienced kind of, being betrayed by our North Korean counterpart before. So which means that we, of course, now we've learned empirically, we learned from our own experience that we cannot this time, we should not be too naive, and on the table with North Korea. But again, as I emphasized earlier, again, as long as they showed those the strong wills to sit on the table, to start the dialogues, I think it pretty much depends on what we can do together in the future. My point is, my answer to that specific question is, of course, is open too, because we didn't start the negotiation yet. We only saw kind of very positive signs, which does tell many things, but at the same time, it doesn't actually tell everything. So it's, again, pretty much depend on the future negotiations. And again, my probably answer will be almost like remain similar.
But Mr. Paul, the test is coming because early April, likely there's going to be joint military exercise as usual between South Korea and the United States. Today we learned through the media that the North suggested to the South, according to the South delegation, that the North will not raise an issue with it. But we do not know whether it is the real meaning coming from the North or the South has manipulated to a certain extent. And we don't know what exactly is the meaning of not raise an issue. So, Mr. Paul, is that going to be the latest test?
Well, it'll be the first test. Once the exercises start, we'll see how the North reacts. I assume that the two envoys from South Korea reported accurately what they heard, and therefore the North has recognized that some exercises will occur. They probably would like them to be smaller and less threatening-looking exercises. There was one report that said that they also do not want to see a second set of exercises following that, because these have been postponed to April, they'll tolerate that, but go on later on to try to limit those exercises. This is a new element, much as Kim Jong-un personally receiving the envoys and laying on friendly photography, and all of that's the new part. But the hard part is the exercises, the build-up of military capabilities, and the hair-trigger nature of the confrontation on the peninsula.
But on the other hand, Mr. Paul, there seems to be nothing to lose for the United States right now, because if that is the case, the joint military exercise will still go on, and U.S. could still, as some wanted to be, preparing for any possibility in the military mean toward the DPRK, even though not many is welcoming that effort. And also at the same time, the U.S. could also just embrace that future opportunity after the North-South head of state meeting one another for a future negotiation with the North. So it seems that the U.S. is the winner?
Well, that may seem like the situation now, but everybody is trying to look as if he will not be the party responsible for the failure of the upcoming talks. So you want to appear obliging, you want to show that you're not out just to promote tension for tension's sake, and at the same time, you don't want to let your guard down and find yourself betrayed by the other parties. Moreover, the North has had the long-term ambition to split Washington and Seoul in their alliance. And if the U.S. mismanages this, or Seoul mismanages this, we could end up with more tensions between Seoul and Washington than before, and that would be playing to North Korea's advantage. So there are a lot of places where losses can take place.
Here's the thing, Mr. Jia. What has really changed? Have we seen real change, in fact? I mean, there's a delegation from the South to the North. There's a discussion. There's a big banquet, 4 hours long. There is some takeaway of indirect quotes coming from the South delegation about the North. There is a lot of nuances going on, and yet none of these nuances at this point suggest any concrete change for the better. Where are we now, Mr. Zhao? Your judgment here.
Well, in fact, I think there is concrete change
Go
from
ahead.
North Korea.
What is it?
Well, if the description about this meeting from the South Korean envoy was accurate, North Koreans made two important concessions. One is Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, explicitly committed to the ultimate goal of denuclearization. If I recall correctly, North Korea has not done that explicitly and at such a high level since Kim Jong-un came into power. Second major concession from North Korea was North Korea offered to suspend missile tests and nuclear tests as long as negotiations with the United States continue. I think that's concrete concession. That's far from being ideal, far from being achieving the entire goal of the United States, but that can be the starting point.
All right. At this point, how shall we judge the nature of the water? Mr. Paul, how much is the U.S. willing to talk directly to the North? And what is going to be the bottom line? Of course, you're not coming from the White House. And because of that, you could tell us what could be the bottom line. Mr. Paul.
Well, I wish I could tell you that.
Why not?
We, as somebody who works in this Washington environment, I have not in my lifetime seen us less prepared in terms of personnel and policy to enter into these negotiations. We have a lot of straightening out to do on what our priorities are in the U.S. We have, of course, said we want maximum pressure and be open to negotiations.
Right.
But that's just a posture. It doesn't tell you what we actually will try to achieve. And who would be the negotiator? Who has the experience? I mean, the North Koreans will have 30 years of looking across the table.
But that's technical issue. That's a technical issue. What about the commitment? There are two categories.
It's more than a tactical issue. There are tactical issues, there are strategic issues, and process and personnel are always important in achieving them. And in this particular administration, you can see the chaos coming out of the White House. It's very hard to know how things are going to play out and what the priorities really are.
So you are not having much confidence in the next step that the U.S. could take. Let's go to Ms. Lim. What about the South? How strong is that partnership with the United States? What is going to be the thing that the South, when seeing it, is likely to change its attitude overall toward the North? Ms. Lim, what is it?
Yes, I appreciate the other panelists, Dr. Pell's comments. It does look like Washington, and more specifically speaking, White House, the Trump administration, doesn't look like to have a kind of clear goal or clear vision or consensus on the how to deal with North Korea. Even though, of course, denuclearization has been the priority, no matter what happened. But that's another another front reason. But behind that, the front reason, what will be the real priority from the Trump administration point of view, it's unclear. But here, more important thing is, again, as I mentioned, again, the Moon Jae-in, he was the chief of the secretary under his predecessor, President Roh Moo-hyun, which means he learned already from the experience between the Roh Moo-hyun administration and the George W. Bush administration, which does provide, I think, a good understandings, strong, solid backgrounds for his own understandings about the alliance or the dialogues or partnership with the White House. So that is why I can be more optimistic this time. I do see a strong bonding and intimate dialogues between the White House and the Blue House.
All right. Confused, but at the same time confident. South Korea, it seems. Let's go to, last but not least, Mr. Zhao, China. What's likely to be the prospect? 1 minute if you can, sir.
Well, I think China will continue to try to facilitate diplomacy on the sideline. China is happy that itself is not in the center of the limelight. China has been in that position for a long time, taking on the pressure. I think China feels relieved to some extent and feel very much encouraged by the willingness of the most relevant parties to engage directly with each other.
All right.
I don't see China, wanting to insert itself at this moment into the center of the discussions, but I think China wants to keep close coordination with South Korea, with the United States, and maybe with North Korea as well,
right, okay.
trying to offer its advice if necessary.
Mr. Paul is scratching his head, trying to figure out what exactly that meant. But anyway, for now, I want to wrap up this conversation. It is a good day to a certain extent. We'll see how things are going. For now, thank you so much, Jiao Tong, Yun Jung Lim, and Douglas Paul. Thank you so much for being with us. All the best.